and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as for yours, but hey, it's something. Now, there's one thing I want to say about this upcoming episode, and I'll have you guys suggest on what you want to do for this episode, because some slight issues arose. I'll probably also do a poll. I might actually do two polls for this one, because it depends on, the issue in question. So, I guess I'll just say it. The next episode that I'm going to be doing, that's going to come out this week, is going to be an episode about the politician known as Bud Dwyer. Everything is almost done, it's basically wrapped up, but there was one section that was giving me trouble, because, first I decided to upload, I wanted to make sure that everything would be up and ready and good before I ended up uploading it and then whatever. For those who don't know why, it's because the politician Bud Dwyer is well known for committing suicide live on television. And I wanted to, in order to be part of the element of the spoopiness, I wanted to show speeches, the speech to lead up to that moment. And basically, here's what I plan to do. Before anybody gets any suspicions, I didn't plan, because, the footage of his suicide is out there. I wasn't planning on showing his full suicide. Basically, here's what I plan to do. I plan to take the footage of Bud Dwyer's suicide, the lead up to it, the part where he pulls his gun out and he starts talking to the audience, no, please don't get near me, I'll hurt someone. And then right as he puts the gun in his mouth, I would then, the screen would go black, but you'd still hear the audio of the suicide. I felt that was the most tasteful way to do it. So then I wanted to make sure if that was okay, because when I uploaded the EPU files, thing without copyright, then it suddenly said, hey, you can't post that there. And I was worried that it might have something to do with the Bud Dwyer suicide footage that I put in the EPU files intro. It doesn't show the suicide, obviously. It just shows him pulling the gun out of the bag. And then I decided, I would get the video, I would put it in the timeline, and then I would have the footage of Bud Dwyer's, thing, and then do the thing I wanted to do. But then I decided to upload a test version without further editing, and then just upload that to my secondary channel, which I used to post Patreon content. But then that got flagged and taken down because it violated YouTube's terms of service. No biggie. Then I decided to do a version where I blurred the footage. That also got taken down. So then I decided to do this version where, I was okay, so then what's the problem? Because I didn't show the footage. I didn't show the death footage. It was just everything leading up to the death footage. So then what I did was I decided to take the video. I just played it on my, media player. And I just started, taking screen caps of it. So it basically shows a stop motion video of the situation with the same thing. Right as he puts the gun in his mouth, the footage cuts so that it's just black and you still hear the footage. And then I uploaded that version to YouTube, and what ended up happening with that one is that one got an age restriction. And with that has led me into a bit of a conundrum with this upcoming episode. And I'm going to ask a couple of things. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and hopefully people who watch this are actually listening to this part of the video so that I can actually get some answers to the questions. And, I will also put polls, I would hope. If I remember correctly, I will put polls, so that way it's also there. So, at this point, is showing all of that necessary, or should I just cut that section out of the video entirely? I personally think that would disrupt the flow of the video as it is. Second, should I just keep this version as it is and just keep it at that, and then do that, whatever? But the next question I wanted to ask is specifically because I kind of want to upload a version of this video to the Patreon. And at this point, I'm kind of stuck at a crossroads with it. Because on one end, I want to upload the version that I originally intended to upload to YouTube that wouldn't be allowed on YouTube. None of the badness. It cuts right before the badness. But then, at that point, is it really worth censoring out the footage And I just checked the Patreon terms of service, and it's like a little bit more on the wiggle room of that. Like, here's what it says about it. It's like, so, okay, let me get the part. People can't use Patreon politicians. Okay, no, that's the section. There it is. Violent graphic content. To summarize, Patreon crooks created. It basically says, I can do it if it says right here. Additionally, content that portrays violent or graphic imagery such as animal abuse, decapitation, gore, and violent death will not be permitted. However, we allow limited exceptions for this type of content when it contains documentary, educational, scientific, and newsworthy elements. I would argue that my content qualifies under that sort of thing. I'm basically giving a mini documentary on Bud Dwyer's life, and unfortunately, one of the biggest parts of his life is that infamous incident. But I still don't know if that's necessarily the best idea, really. So I'm basically leaving it up to the blood-hungry people on... No, I'll actually just make it a Patreon poll. Hold on. I made it into a Patreon poll, so if you're a Patreon, check the Patreon and, you'll find a poll to do. And while I'm here, I also ask this. Due to the subject matter and the potential issues that would happen with this particular video, I will have to ask this question. Would you be okay if I put the story arc in this episode? You see, because if you haven't been noticing, there's actually been an EPU story arc that has been going on in every video. Well, not every. Well, kind of in every video. I made there's a Patreon video where I go over the whole story arc as of the episode that came out. And we're at the end of the year, so I guess I could stop pretending that it's not a thing. Like, we're in the final stretch, but we're about to reach the climax of the story arc. If you saw the last episode, you know that the story arc's getting a little heated. So, basically, I only have a couple of segments of the story arc left I wanted to do. So, the thing is, I planned on skipping one of the episodes this month. So I basically just want to know, are you okay with me skipping this episode and then putting this story arc in the next episode? Or are you like, no, if you want to put it in this episode, put it in this episode. I mean, I think it might be, and I'll just say this. The reason why I didn't want to put it in the next episode is because the next episode, I plan to talk about Jim Jones of Jonestown. So it's like, I was like, it seems a little weird to put a story arc in that episode. But then, now that I think about it, it's like, it's a little bit weird to put a story arc in this episode. But then again, I'm pretty sure Linkara puts story arcs. He put a story arc in the freaking episode where he talks about a character being raped. That's a thing that he does. So anyways, I'm just asking some questions, just to let you know. And yeah, you see, I spent a lot of time going over all that. So let's get right into the news. First news story is a very interesting development coming from Bolivia. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bolivia is one of the few extremely based countries in the world, due to the fact that ever since 2006, it has been led by the political party MAS-IPSP, or the Movement for Socialism Political Instrument for the Sovereignty of Peoples. Almost uninterrupted, it started when Evo Morales got elected in 2006, and its term was briefly interrupted in 2019 when the U.S. government and the Latin American right wing, did what they did best and did a coup against him. And then, basically after that, MAS immediately won back power, not with Evo, but with a new member, well, not a new member, but with a different member of the party, Luis Arce Catecora, who was the Ministry of the Economy and Public Finance under Evo Morales, who's basically been part of Evo's cabinet for the entirety of his administration. It's basically, he was the Minister of Finance from 2006 to 2009, but then that was when the constitution was changed in Bolivia. Because if you don't remember, during Evo Morales' first term, he changed the constitution of Bolivia to basically turn Bolivia into a brand new nation. It basically reformed the entirety of the country, and that led into the Minister of Finance under the previous regime to become the Minister of the Economy and Public Finance. And he remained in that position until 2017, when he had to leave due to medical concerns because he had like a kidney tumor. Then after he made a recovery, he went back to Bolivia to take over his position once more. But then that's when the coup happened. And Arce was like the one member of the administration that they were a little more nice to because of his previous medical condition and the fact that he was a lot different than Evo. Like, most people understood this. Him and Evo Morales were not necessarily the exact same person. Evo Morales was well known for being like that extremely like populist type figure. Meanwhile, Arce has been described as one of the few technocrats in Bolivia. He was more calm, reserved, lighter skinned. And it was actually due to this that MAS wasn't necessarily even backing the idea of Arce as their candidate, because this is where the drama sort of began. In the wake of Evo Morales having to flee, MAS was kind of stuck over what the heck to do for the upcoming 2020 election that they had to do. And there were two factions of the party. One backed Luis Arce, and the other one backed, forgive me for mispronouncing this name, David Chuy, an indigenous candidate who was sort of like a person who was more aligned with social activist bases. Meanwhile, Arce was more sort of like a figurehead for party leaders, which led to both of those factions very much being like, we want this person to be the candidate. And Evo Morales had to step in to sort of mediate the issues. And what ended up happening was, due to the fact that him and David had already had some tension, due to the fact that David was repeatedly floated as a potential presidential successor to Evo Morales, he instead told the members of MAS, support Arce for your nominee. And as a consolation, David was chosen to be the running mate. I'm pretty sure if it was an option, he would have picked Alvaro Garcia Linera, who was his vice president for the entirety of his tenure. But when Arce became president of Bolivia, there was some tension between Evo and Arce. See, Evo, when he stepped back into the country, he basically wanted to sort of maintain his status as a top figure within the party, a person who helped dictate policy and such. Basically, he wanted to still sort of remain in power. Meanwhile, Arce wanted to pursue his own path to leadership. And neither of these things are necessarily problematic. Like, as long as Evo maintained sort of some sort of like, he's not in government, he doesn't actually dictate policy, but if he maintained that role in sort of like an activist setting, then it's like, that's one thing. But if he was trying to actually take control of Arce and basically rule vicariously through him, then that's a little bit weird. And I'm pretty sure if you asked both of them, they would essentially say like, no, what, like Evo would probably say, no, what I'm trying to do is this, and then Arce would say, no, what he's trying to do is this. Which has led to Arce and Evo being in a bit of a conflict with each other, to the point where he has maintained a lot of heavy criticisms of Arce's administration. While this was going on, there was this one subsection of MAS that maintained that sort of criticism, like that very much put those criticisms really close to their heart. And were basically super hardcore Evo Morales loyalists who wanted to basically have Arce as an interim president before putting Evo Morales back into the presidency, with presidential polls literally having Arce and Evo being two opposing candidates. And then a couple of weeks ago, even though I follow him on Twitter, I somehow missed this. Like, I guess it didn't really seem like that much of a big thing. It didn't really, I mean, I did find the tweet where he said this, but like, it didn't really seem like that was the tweet that he was doing. But like, anyways, Evo Morales announced that he intended to run for president in the upcoming 2025 Bolivian presidential election. Which leads to a huge problem. MAS already has the presidency. Why is Evo Morales running for president in 2025? He's maintained that the government has been like opposing activists, and that it was basically just him saying like he wants power again, and that Arce was kind of standing in his way of that. And then what ended up happening is that MAS has decided to expel Arce and David because they didn't go to the meeting where they were going to select Evo Morales as their candidate for the upcoming election. And the reason why they didn't go was because there were some activists within MAS who were heavily critical of this process because it was sort of rushed out at the last second. Like, it basically happened like Evo Morales announced he was going to run for president, and then they basically rushed immediately to be like, let's do this convention now. Now, many people are trying to figure out, like, what does this mean for MAS? Like, does MAS, is it over for MAS? Is MAS going to lose the upcoming election due to these conflicts? No, they're not. If I had to take a wild guess, Evo will probably win handedly. What happens afterwards, that's yet to be determined. But Evo Morales is more than likely going to win the upcoming Bolivian election. RK is probably not going to initiate a run for president in the general election against him. Like, he's probably going to accept his defeat, like take the L and leave. But this will be a big problem for MAS down the line. Because, unfortunately, they're doing the thing that Latin American leftist parties just can't stop doing. They can't stop with the hero worship. They can't, like, I've mentioned this a million times before. Leftist parties in Latin America, leftist parties everywhere, we need to learn to grow beyond certain figures. And that's one of the huge problems with the left. We are so overly attached to the very few politicians that are actually good that we can't even fathom the idea that maybe we need to grow past them. The French left, they are so attached to Mélenchon that they're still potentially floating him around for the next election, even though he said he didn't want to run. Who was the one who had to save the Brazilian left? Lula. Like, they tried to get, like, Christina Kirchner to run again in Argentina, even though it wasn't even allowed. Like, we're look at this. Look at all these figures. They're old. They are close to death's door. We can't keep rolling out these people when we need them. Like, because we need to be able to win without them. Like, with MAS. If they put all their eggs in the Evo Morales basket and then refuse to build up any other people outside of Evo, then unfortunately, they're probably not going to get very far in the future. A similar thing happened with, like, PT in Brazil. They tried to build their entire brand around Lula. Then, they tried to shift their brand to other people, like Dilma Rousseff and Fernando Haddad, neither of which turned out well. And MAS was the one party that was looking to be a prime example of how to do this right. They ran Evo for a long time. Then there came a time where they couldn't run Evo again. So it was time to move on and find a new person. And that's when RK came in. He had a large amount of ties to Evo Morales, but he was a new face, a new person who could bring MAS into a new direction. Unfortunately, all of that is going to be squandered because Evo Morales thinks that he's the true person who's the one who can lead. And there are a lot of people in his party that refuse to let Evo Morales retire. Some of it's ego, yeah, I have to acknowledge that. But anyways, let's just move on to the next story because let's just finally get into more different topics. Okay, so this topic is coming from the House of Representatives because something really big has been happening with the House of Representatives. Chuy Garcia has a primary challenger. Alderman Raymond Lopez is challenging Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia for Congress seat. Lopez, one of City Council's most conservative members, says he wants to return common sense to D.C. and would fight to raise the minimum wage and overhaul the country's immigration system. Now, there are a lot of things to unpack here, but yes, Raymond Lopez is basically one of the few figures, well, not even one of the few figures, but he's one of the figures of, like, basically, we all know how Chicago is, like, kind of, like, on one end of Chicago politics, you have these people who run as, like, game changers, and they want to change everything. They want to be, like, super progressive people. You know, like, Chuy is one of them. And we've had a ton of these people in the past. Harold Washington, Jesse Jackson. I don't think Jesse Jackson ever ran for an office in Chicago, but, you know, he's definitely in that sort of area. And Raymond Lopez is sort of the guy, he's sort of like a pick-me. Like, he's basically, like, most of the time, like, I'll just say this. Most of the time in Chicago politics, and in Illinois politics in general, the politicians who represent it, sort of like the firebrands and the people who want to change things for the better, the progressives, the leftists, those are people who are usually black and brown. Meanwhile, the ones who represent the opposite side of things are white, and Raymond is basically the pick-me for the white people in Chicago. I mean, nowhere is that more evident than the fact that he backed Paul Vallis's bid against Brandon Johnson. Although before that, he did endorse Willie Wilson, who ran to the right of many Chicago politicians. Now, there are a lot of things about this that you need to understand. He says a lot. He said a lot of these things. We want this district wants people who want to bring common sense and decency and blah blah blah. It's no, they don't. No, I mean, I'm being serious. They don't. This district is a pretty left-wing district, all things considered. Before Chuy, they were represented by Luis Gutierrez, who was, again, one of these figures. I mean, granted, he's not necessarily perfect. Luis Gutierrez, he endorsed Richard Daley's bids for Chicago mayor, but he also backed people like Howard Dean. He also backed people like Tony Breckwinkle, who, Keith Ellison for DNC chair, Marie Newman. He backed Chuy. This district is pretty, not just blue, but pretty progressive blue, too. And another thing is that it's a terrible idea to run as a primary bid in this sort of area, because primary bids typically don't do well. That's why a lot of these politicians are in power, like Danny K. Davis. Granted, primary bids have been getting better, but it's usually primary bids from the left and from politicians who've been in office for so long. Dan Lipinski got primaried by Marie Newman, and then we also have Danny K. Davis, who had a pretty close primary bid with Keena Collins. But Chuy is not necessarily in that, realm of possibly be getting primaried, at least not that much. And another thing that is interesting about Raymond Lopez is that Raymond Lopez, first of all, I'll just say this. Here's a funny thing. In the news article, they explain, they had a Chuy Garcia aide contact them. They said, the person who was in the Chuy Garcia campaign said that Lopez's run for Congress is, quote, nothing more than an attention-grabbing stunt. The choice is clear, the proven record of integrity, dedication, and results versus a perennial candidate riding on the coattails of Ed Burke, one of the most disgraced politicians in Illinois history. And in an email I got from Chuy Garcia, it literally says, Tucker Carlson's best friend is running for Congress. And it says, today we received news that a Fox News contributor, Ray Lopez, is running for Congress. Because, yes, he's a pick-me for the right-wing, white people. And, as they said, he is not that good at running for office and maintaining that run for office. Raymond Lopez actually also wanted to be a pick-me in the Chicago mayoral race in 2023, but he also dropped out of that because his campaign was going nowhere. But not just that, he also tried to run for Congress in Illinois District 4 during the initial election. And what happened is Raymond Lopez dropped out 2 months into the bid because Chuy Garcia was so popular that there was literally no other option. He wasn't the only one to do it, but it was the only one to do it who was a shitty person. Another person who did it was Carlos Ramirez Rosa, but he ended up endorsing Chuy because it was just look, it's better for us to stay together and work together than to have a separate, to split the vote. Anyways, Chuy Garcia is going to stay in Congress. Not much else to say. Speaking of things that not much else to say, Nina Turner finally revealed the thing that she's been teasing months for. And I said it, in the last episode, I said that I thought it was going to be another run for office, or I thought it was going to be something. I thought it was going to be something that really probably would not be worth it. I said, basically, there was, to be real, there was really no scenario in what she said that I would really be enthused about. There was absolutely nothing she would say at that point that I actually would have been yes! That I would have been enthused to see. I'm sorry, but she hyped it up for, half a year. Literally, there was nothing she could have done that would have actually made me excited. Granted, the thing that she said is good, but it's just underwhelming, especially considering, I'll just say what it is. Nina Turner has announced that she's going to be forming a new group called We Are Somebody. It's basically going to be a labor-focused grassroots group that's going to help unions. Okay. Yeah, good. It's good to support unions, but it's just like, this is what you've been hyping up for months? Really? A thing that I really can't get involved with in any capacity because I'm broke, so I can't give you money. I don't have a union. I don't even have a job, so I can't really focus with you on that regard. And again, like, this is what you've been building up? Like, if she teased this for like a month or for like 2 months, yeah, but like she was teasing it like in literally July, I think. She was like, you'll like what you see, blah blah blah. It's like, whatever. Like, honestly, it's literally whatever. In the most literal sense, it is whatever. Because it's like, ultimately, it's a good organization, a good idea. But it's like, I mean, even if it was a freaking run for Congress, at least it would have been something for me to clown on or something. That's the thing. It's like, I was at this point expecting like something that I would have to like be like, I'm officially done with Nina Turner, but I can't even get that. Like, I mean, it literally is just an organization that will do good things. So it's like, okay. Anyways, speaking of an organization doing good things, well, actually, that's not a good segue because this organization does not do good things. But big thing to drop from a lot of interesting people. So apparently, Cornel West has decided to leave the Green Party and initiate an independent bid for the presidency. As Dr. West's campaign for president grows, he believes the best way to challenge the entrenched system is by focusing 100% on the people, not on the intricacies of internal party dynamics, said the West campaign in a statement. West, an outspoken progressive and longtime university scholar, has ruffled feathers among Democrats who viewed him as a potential spoiler for Joe Biden, recent election, blah, blah, blah. West has batted back that the idea that he might pull support from Biden in multiple interviews, saying that the Biden campaign is free to court the voters flocking to him. A former Senator Bernie Sanders surrogate, West first entered the race on the People's Party ticket, but that party's lack of ballot access soon compelled him to run for the Green Party's presidential nomination instead. Now that's another thing that we need to understand. Like he never, like, this is how weird it is, because like, I literally don't even remember him saying that he left the People's Party, who was going to withdraw the People's Party bid. But like, everybody just says like, yeah, he dropped from the People's Party bid, and then not only that, they found out the reason. That it's like, oh, it's because of ballot access. Sure, most assume that was the reason, but now that reason has kind of been thrown out the window because of this Green Party debacle. And this decision makes like so little sense, considering like at this point he would have just gotten the go-ahead with this bid. He got the like Jill Stein worked on his campaign. He was basically given the go-ahead. Like, Jill Stein and Ajambu Baraka, the two of the people who were considered like some of the still maintaining leaders of the Green Party, they were giving Cornel West their blessing. He basically could have just he literally didn't have to do anything for their nomination, because the Green Party does this. They ask big prominent people, hey, you want to run for our nomination? And it's like, basically they'll give it to whoever they want. In 2018, they tried to get Ventura. In 2012, they courted like Roseanne Barr to run for their bid. But like literally, West was in the prime position. And now, as they state, they're now the Green Party is scrambling to find a new person because they were putting all their eggs in Cornel West's basket. Like, literally, all of the freaking like Green Party memes were just like, put Cornel West immediately on there. And it's like, now all that's literally changed at the last second. And with this, his whole campaign has completely changed once more, because like originally when he first launched his campaign website and the People's Party website looked exactly the same, because that was the plan. The plan was for them to basically build off of each other. Then he shifted his brand to the Green Party. He changed his campaign logo, he changed how his website looked. It was basically going to be entirely Green Party focused. And now it is completely changed again. His website, his logo, everything looks completely different now. And it's just like, and his campaign's just gotten way weirder. Like, it's technically gotten more detailed, like, give it that. Like, his page is a lot more detailed, but it's also gotten a lot more weirdly platitudey. For example, abolish poverty. Okay, that's a little bit of a platitude, to be honest. Listen to this. Moving beyond the Green New Deal to a global green reconstruction initiative. Okay, but, like, what is that? What does that mean? Like, can you tell me what that means? Like, look, like, you don't have to put, like, any details when you do put Green New Deal on your campaign websites for a lot of candidates, because it's like, they know what that means. They know the bill, they know AOC's bill, or they know about the Green Party initiative, but, like, he's doing the Global Green Reconstruction Initiative. It's like, what does that mean? He doesn't have a page for that. Move beyond Medicare for all towards health justice. What the fuck does that mean? Like, Marianne Williamson did the same thing in 2020. She was like, we need to have a health care system as opposed to the sick care system that we have now. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, and again, this makes no sense for many different reasons. Like, the People's Party was like, he ran for the People's Party, and at best, they have ballot access in one state. Meanwhile, the Green Party, at best, they have ballot access in 17 states. Makes sense why he would change his mind to run for a different party, right? Well, now he's going to run as an independent, and in order to do so, he needs to get his name on the ballot in as many states as he can, and he's starting at literal square one. Now, there are some people who've been trying to say, oh, well, write-in bids. It's like, no, fuck write-in bids. Write-in bids are pointless. He needs his name on the ballot. People aren't going to write in Cornel West. People don't write in your name on the ballot unless there's a literal massive drive in order for that to happen. And a presidential campaign is the least likely office for you to have that sort of bid. It needs to be a local office or a state office. It literally makes zero sense for Cornel West to drop out of the Green Party bid and then run as an independent. Now, a lot of theories have been proposed as to why this is. And the biggest one is being the blame of Peter Dow, because Peter Dow was just brought in as the campaign manager of the Cornel West campaign. And coincidentally, when this bid, like right when he enters the bid, all of a sudden the party's now changed its entire platform and is now going to be running an independent bid. So a lot of people have been pointing their finger at Peter Dow, and everybody's been putting their fingers at Peter Dow for different reasons. A certain group of people are trying to claim that he's actually a DNC shill who's convinced Cornel West to run as an independent in order to make it so that he's less likely to take away votes from Joe Biden come the general election. The more likely scenario is that Peter Dow is a complete fucking moron who doesn't understand anything. Like, Peter Dow literally makes no sense to hire as your campaign manager. Every single campaign he has worked for has failed. And at this point, like, why wouldn't he just convince him to drop out of the race entirely? Now, I get it might be a little more suspicious, like, if you just asked him to drop out of the race entirely instead of just doing this. But it's like, the most likely scenario is that Cornel West and Peter Dow are just completely stupid and they don't understand anything. They don't know how to run a campaign. They don't understand any of these issues. And, like, Richard Winger from Ballot Access News, like, in a comment, has reportedly told the reason why he believes that Cornel West is doing this. It says right here, Cornel West switched from green to independent because he mistakenly believes that the Federal Election Commission might charge him with violating campaign finance laws if he continues as a green. His campaign has been raising money to pay for Green Party petition drives. This has no basis for his fear. The FEC has never said a presidential candidate can't pay for paid circulators for party petition drives. Which, again, shows Cornel West doesn't understand how campaigns work. Like, Cornel West is an activist. He's not a politician. This man is not a politician, and he has shown that repeatedly. Elected officials and activists are not the same thing. An activist has less strings than a politician. And that's why I don't hate AOC and all these other people. It's like, a politician has to do certain things. They have to make certain concessions. They have to act differently than an activist. Ever since, like, activists and hippies have gotten involved in actual campaigns, like, ever since, like, lefty activists have been involved in presidential campaigns, they understand this. Like, that's why there was this big divide with the Socialist Party back in the day, because there were some of them that were able to readily adapt into becoming politicians, while others maintained their extremely radical views that are more akin to activism. And the problem is, people judge a politician on what an activist would do, or an activist on what a politician would do. When these two things are completely different, there can be overlap. Cori Bush has shown that. We have activists who have run as politicians in the past and will continue to do so. Basically, all the socialist politicians in the United States' history have at one point been activists. But that's the thing. They adapt and they grow and they understand how the system works and how to work within it. The problem is, like, and it's the same thing with me, like a pundit and everybody else. They sort of have the same thing. Like, I could never be a politician because I would say things that a politician wouldn't say. And I understand that. And I do not judge politicians based on the fact that they don't say the things that I say. And you know what's the absolute worst part in all of this? Despite the fact that Cornel West has shown, like, multiple times at this point that he does not understand how a presidential campaign works, people are still on the Cornel West train, the fucking vanguard. Like, I will get into the vanguard in an upcoming episode, and if they see this or the episode that I do on them, and they, like, invite me to a debate, like, I'm not gonna hold any punches. I don't care if they hate me or love me or whatever. Those two are complete fucking idiots who do not understand anything. The fact that they are getting duped by the fucking Cornel West bid, even though it is a very clearly, obviously failed bid, is just ludicrous to me. This is like his big, like, one of his, like, this is like his third biggest fuck up in this bid. First was announcing with the People's Party, then was switching to the Green Party, then was switching to being independent. Like, he's already done 3 big fuck-ups already. This is something that you can't do. But anyways, let's just move on to the main topic of this video. I originally wanted to do this episode on something regarding land back or an indigenous-led issue, but unfortunately, even though I asked repeatedly for help in resources in regards to the land back issue, nobody came to help me, so I really can't say anything about the land back issue without actually being like I really can't say anything about the issue, because if I'm to be honest, if I were to take the research that I've done in the topic now, it would not come out good at all, because from what I've seen, it does not look like the land back movement is that big or serious of a movement, or a movement with very clear goals at this point. Anyways, we'll talk about a different issue regarding colonialism, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is one of the only U.S. territories to have all the U.S. territories have a little bit of debate and discussion over their status, but Puerto Rico is a little bit different, because Puerto Rico's become a very big topic. Like, I'm sorry to say, but Guam does not have as much discussion about it as Puerto Rico does. And a lot of it revolves around its status with the United States, because a lot of people have a lot of different perspectives on the topic of Puerto Rican status, and a lot of people outside of Puerto Rico don't necessarily have a full grasp of the situation. Neither do I, but I'm going to do my best to try and, at the very least, give you step 1 in understanding and my opinion and whatever. So, for those who don't know, Puerto Rican status has been a hotly debated topic for a long period of time. Like TLDR, ever since they got independence from Spain, that's when things started really getting the ball rolling. In fact, some people were so impassioned about the issue that they literally shot and almost killed 5 congressmen. Now, what are the debates on Puerto Rican status? Well, there is generally accepted to be a couple of ideas. Like, there was one idea that was thrown out there a while ago, where it was the possibility of Puerto Rico joining an alliance with a couple of other islands in the area, but that didn't really pan out. One idea that was proposed somewhat recently that is kind of funny is the idea that Puerto Rico should reunify with Spain, because Puerto Rico was going through financial troubles at the time, and there was a guy who was saying, like, hey, our solution would be very simple if we worked with the Spanish Empire. Like, that is a thing that did apparently get floated around a couple of times, but thankfully it is not a popular decision, like, for obvious reasons. The next status, like the next possible idea for their status, is a simple one: maintaining the status quo, being part of the United States Commonwealth. Next is something called the Free Association. It's where the U.S. would still technically control the island. They would still have a lot of, they would basically still maintain control of the island, but the island would act as if it's its own nation. The U.S. refers to it as a soft independence. Meanwhile, a lot of people in Puerto Rico view it as soft commonwealth. The last two status options are ones that are a lot more popular, especially on the left. We have Puerto Rican statehood, simply put, making Puerto Rico the 51st state in the United States, or Puerto Rican independence, where Puerto Rico would become its own independent nation. You can understand why those last two are considered somewhat popular. Statehood is very popular among, like, say, I guess, people who are like left of center, progressive, social democrat types. Meanwhile, independence is an option that is very popular among more radical members, like socialists and onwards. There are some socialists that do also support statehood, but that's for like a little bit of a different reason. But that's usually like people in the West, like people like in the American mainland. Like, what about the ones in Puerto Rico? Like, what about the people in Puerto Rico themselves? What do they think of the issue? Well, believe it or not, this is a very hot topic in Puerto Rico. And each of the five parties sort of have a stance on the issue. Because for those of you who don't know, and this might sway you into having an opinion on the issue, Puerto Rico has its own political system. Like, if you don't know already, yeah, Puerto Rico has its own political system where they have basically a five-party system. Meanwhile, again, United States, we only have two. So first, there's Project Dignity. It is the broadly centrist party, and as such, it has no stance on the issue. A newer party that has been prevalent in Puerto Rico is the Citizens' Victory Movement, which in its platform advocates for decolonization of Puerto Rico and a constitutional assembly to resolve the matter. Its more prominent members, like Rafael Bernabe, have advocated for full-on independence, but there are some members of the party that advocate for free association, so it's kind of a coalition between the two. And that's also where you get into a little bit of the debate between, like, does free association and independence, like, do they count? Because sometimes people view both of these issues as if they are the same issue. The Puerto Rican Independence Party is rather obvious. The new Progressive Party, don't be confused, it's the right-wing party, is pro-statehood, and the Popular Democratic Party is similar to the Democratic Party in the United States, where there are two warring factions, usually divided by age. Older members of the party full-on advocate for the Commonwealth. Meanwhile, there are some newer members around the time of the Obama administration that have sort of changed their stance, that are a bit more on the side of free association, which is where we get the idea that free association and Commonwealth are very closely related things. And despite the fact that parties of each of these factions have had like realms in politics, like been powerful and have had positions of power, there's been a lot of problems because they haven't really been able to address the issue itself. And one way the politicians try to do this is that they are trying to like have a referendum on the issue, and they've had 6 referendums at least since the 1960s. Okay, so first there was a referendum in 1965. The referendum results were 60.41% voting to remain in the Commonwealth, 38.98% voting for statehood, and 0.6% voting for independence. But the reason why those results are incredibly lopsided is because that referendum had the pro-statehood party boycott it. 1993 was a different referendum, but this one was very interesting because there was no major boycotts. Because one of the big problems with all these referendums is that usually there's a huge issue that leads to one of the parties leaving. But 1993, there was no problems. Nobody complained. They had the issue. It was put on the referendum, and here were the results. 4.47% voted for independence, 46.64% voted for statehood, and 48.89% voted to remain in the Commonwealth. 1998 was when things changed. So this one had a very interesting referendum. This was the first referendum to include the option of free association alongside the options of statehood, independence, Commonwealth, and they even included an option of nothing. Basically no change. The problem was the way they redefined Commonwealth in this referendum. So even if the people voted for Commonwealth, it would be a completely different system than what they had currently. So what ended up happening is that the Commonwealth Party decided to do an informal boycott of the ballot. And what I mean by informal, boycott means that when the results came in, it was 46.63% statehood, 2.55% independence, 0.29% free association, and 0.06% Commonwealth. And that's because all the Commonwealth voters voted for none, 50.46%, which basically just meant we do nothing, and we maintain the status quo. And we didn't really get any issue pushing of this until 2012 during the Obama administration. This was the one where the United States got really, really involved because Obama was basically he was a bit worried because free association might have actually won the result. And I think it was he was trying to push for this because it was oh, this is the best case scenario for all of us. But the way this one was done was a little different. You see, this one was done in a similar style to the California recall elections, where they asked a question should we remain a Commonwealth? And then you would vote on that one. And then the second option was, what would you want if we don't have a Commonwealth? It was worded exactly regardless of how you voted in the first option, tell us how you would go in the second option. Which is a weird way to do this sort of thing, because if they vote no, then what's the point of doing a second part? And it's always been the thing. It's oh, well, do I vote for this part? And the whole point is yes, you're supposed to vote for that part regardless. The California recall, it's regardless of whether or not you wanted Gavin Newsom to be recalled, it's if he were recalled, who would you choose to be the candidate? And when the results came in this referendum, what ended up happening is that 53.97% of voters said they did not want to be in the Commonwealth. Meanwhile, when it was chosen, what would we be instead, 5.49% voted independence, 33.34% voted for free association, and 61.16% voted for statehood. 2017 was when we got another referendum. This one was actually going to be slated to be the most interesting referendum, at least at the time, because this referendum was going to originally not have the status, the Commonwealth status, as an option. It was originally going to be independence or statehood, and that was a big deal at the time. But then the PPD demanded that Commonwealth be an option, and then what ended up happening was that they put Commonwealth as an option, but the way it was worded had them go this is unfair, because the way it was worded implied that Commonwealth was them being a territory, imperialism, which it is. But the PPD doesn't want people to know that, otherwise they won't vote for it. So the PPD decided to do a boycott. And this referendum was a lot more weird in another regard, because it lumped independence and free association as a singular option, as opposed to having them both be separate options. Again, basing it on the assumption it's basically the same thing, when it's not. So the results ended up being 1.35% territory, 1.52% independent/free association, and 97.13% voting for statehood. The most recent referendum on the issue was held in 2020, which was a simple should we be a state referendum. 52.52 saying yes, 47.48 saying no. Now you might say, with all these referendums on the issue, why hasn't there been any solution to the problem? Well, simply put, the biggest problem with all of this is that it doesn't matter what Puerto Rico wants, it matters what the United States wants, because the United States has to approve whatever the heck Puerto Rico does. Like, if Puerto Rico wants to be independent, the United States has to sign off on it. And all of these referendums, they need U.S. approval. Like, the U.S. needs to send an actual referendum status to Puerto Rico in order for them to choose that option. If the United States doesn't approve the referendum, then the referendum is non-binding. Now, I guess I've delayed it long enough. I guess I might as well explain like what I actually believe on this issue, because, might as well. It is my show. Now, as I've gotten more radical, perhaps maybe my position has changed on this issue. Maybe now that I understand a lot more about Puerto Rico and sort of its understanding about it, maybe, just maybe, I will have a better understanding of this issue, and maybe I might be pro-independence. No, I'm not pro-independence. Sorry. I think the best option logistically is statehood. I'm sympathetic to independence. Don't get me wrong. I understand why Puerto Rico would probably just want full-on independence, especially in this regard. Let me explain one thing. I have more credence and more understanding of independence if it is literally a separate territory. Like if it's an island, they automatically get bumped up in sort of whether or not they want to be independent or not. I will be more sympathetic to an independence thing if they're an island. Because if they're an island, they are literally removed from the mainland. Their culture is going to be a lot different than the mainland. And it's the same thing. Puerto Rico's culture is vastly different than a lot of the culture of the United States. And Hawaii, vastly different culture there too. Alaska had a different culture until the Whiteys got involved. An island being independent makes more sense to me than if a territory, it's the simple thing. In the United States, Puerto Rican independence is the one that is the highest, in my opinion, on sort of the status of them, followed by the rest of the territories, Hawaii, Alaska, and then at the bottom of the respecting territories, we have, secession from the South. And then, right above them, we have the super vapid independence movements, California independence or Texas independence. Really? Like I said, I'm very sympathetic to the issue of Puerto Rican independence, but I think there's too many logistical problems for Puerto Rico to become an independent nation. Puerto Rican citizenship, what happens to the Puerto Ricans that have been in the United States for their entire lives? Do they get citizenship even though they were born in Puerto Rico? What has happened to the Puerto Rican citizenship and economic ties? And this is where you probably might ask, well, wouldn't free association solve that problem? Because free association, I kind of went into the assumption that you did understand free association a bit. As I said, free association is basically Puerto Rico sees itself as independent, but under a technicality, it is part of the United States. It effectively governs itself as an independent nation, but in all intents and purposes, it technically still is part of the United States. And it's just territory with extra steps. Why do you think the pro-territory party is the one that's advocating for the position? Ultimately, this is a meaningless gesture if it doesn't actually have full-on independence. It's basically, let me give some examples on what it kind of reminds me of. This is basically similar to when after the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU, they wanted to have some of the people advocated for a permanent customs union between the EU and the UK so that they could maintain all of their EU status. They could maintain all of the trade, all of the economic problems with the EU. They could maintain all of that stuff through this customs union. So effectively, they would leave the EU, but they would still have a lot of the things that make them part of the EU. Or a more direct scenario, basically take this but flip it, and you have the situation with Taiwan. Like, Taiwan, for all intents and purposes, is an independent nation. Them declaring independence would essentially just be a formality. The only thing that would change about Taiwan and China's situation if Taiwan declared independence would be that China would immediately start invading them. China doesn't invade them because they don't see a need to, because they see Taiwan as their property. Taiwan doesn't feel a need to declare independence because they already see themselves as an independent nation without the need for a formal declaration of independence. And ultimately, this would be a huge disservice to the Puerto Rican independence movement, who don't want to have the US still have some form of control over them. What they want is independence from the United States. So I think it's unfair to just have their independence be essentially it's essentially just giving them, I don't really know how to say this correctly, but it's essentially like having your brother give the final punch to a bad guy in a video game. They didn't help you at all. You've been playing that game for 5 hours, and you're finally on the final boss, and then you only have one hit left to kill the boss, and then you just hand them to your little brother, and you say, "Here, you do it," and then they get to be like, "I won the game." This essentially does nothing. But ultimately, this should be a decision up to the Puerto Ricans. Ultimately, I want to give the Puerto Ricans a referendum where it's every voting age adult shows up to the polls, and you get to have this referendum. Statehood, independence. Those are your options. Which do you want? You want independence? We'll give you the land. Here you go. Here's the contract for the land. You own it now. Goodbye. Or, your state, here's the star. Welcome aboard. And no funny business. I don't want the PPD to be like, but you're saying that we're a colony? Yes, you are a colony. And I'm trying to make sure that you guys stop being a colony. And in the meantime, Puerto Ricans need to be given some form of autonomy sort of in the United States. Again, they're just treated as a colony, a territory. They get taxed, but they don't face any repercussions. That's why they consider themselves, why there's a huge independence movement in Puerto Rico. Because they really see themselves as an independent nation, essentially. They don't, their politics doesn't look anything like ours. They're completely disconnected from the rest of the United States. U.S. politicians don't come down there unless they're a politician that is from Puerto Rico, or there's a natural disaster that they have to go there to virtue signal about. But we need to make them more integrated in the United States. And that would include, if you want them to be considered part of the states, want them to be more inclined to be statehood, then here's a suggestion: give them a trial run of statehood. And what I mean by that is, simply give them the ability to vote for the freaking president of the United States, give them one electoral vote, or however many their population requires them to have, and give their freaking members of Congress the ability to vote and pass bills. And of course, extend this to every single territory and DC. Hell, give it to the Cherokee, representative. Sure, they would take elected politics in the United States a lot more seriously, and then even then you would realize you would understand certain things. For example, Puerto Rico is a lot more right-wing than you realize. Anyways, that's pretty much all I gotta say on this topic. Puerto Rico, please be state number 51. But hey, if you leave, well, it was nice having you in the Commonwealth. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.